Well, I'm very excited about today. I have one of my good friends, Vince Antonucci, with me. Vince is a pastor, author, and just become a dear friend to me. I was first introduced to you, Vince. I was thinking about this, just knowing that we were going to be together today when I was writing The Always God. Don Gates introduced me to you. And if anybody out there has read The Always God and you enjoyed it because Vince's handprint is all over it. He helped me write it. And I would send him drafts and they would come back like red ink all over them, like I was in a ninth grade English paper, man. And but I give him credit in the tributes there, where I just say thank you so much for just helping me with that, and just connected and been a dear friend, and so even connected in Israel earlier. And so Vince, thanks for being on today.
I'm honored, man. It's so cool, and the book is good because of you. I just did some editing, but man, it's an honor to be here with you.
Well, thanks so much, and thanks so much for spending time with our team recently. You make us better, and I want to get into some of just who you are and what you're talking to the team about, what you did talk to the team about. But let's begin just telling us a little bit about yourself. Tell us your background, because what I love about you, and we're going to talk about this, is you came to Christ at a later age than most. You didn't grow up in the church. And so tell us a little bit about your story. Some people are hearing your name for the very first time.
Sure.
And so tell us who you are and just catch us up, bring us up to date to where you are now.
Yeah, my mother is Jewish. My father was a professional poker player, gambling addict. And so they did not take me to church much. I actually never went to church.
Didn't go to vacation Bible school.
No, I did not. I literally never went to church one single
Where'd
time.
you grow up?
East Coast, New Jersey, Florida. We moved around a lot. My dad was often running from someone or something. He ended up on America's Most Wanted, so I had that going for me.
Did not know that.
Yeah.
Interesting fact. Yeah. You're the only guy I've had on my podcast whose parents were on America's Most Wanted.
Yeah, it was for embezzling money from Ted Williams, the famous baseball player, and so he didn't kill anybody or anything. But and so not only did they not take me to church, I say I never met a Christian. That can't be true. I must have met a Christian, but no one ever identified themselves as a Christian. No one ever mentioned Jesus. And so growing up, I literally didn't know anything about God, Jesus, or Christianity. Nothing. And so went off to college, and the Easter morning of my sophomore year in college, I was sitting in my dorm room. I was waiting for my girlfriend. She was late. And so I turned on the TV, and we had 3 channels. We didn't have cable, and every channel had on what I consider to be a dumb religious show. And I would have just turned the TV off, but the 3rd channel looked potentially comical. It was this old man, not old like old man, and he was sitting like scrunched down in this chair, and he before I could turn the TV off, he started talking, and he went, "Now, we've been talking about the last week of Jesus Christ's life, and today I'm going to talk about," and then he said something I don't remember because I didn't know what it was. And then he said, most scholars believe that this event happened on the Tuesday of Jesus last week. But today I will prove to you through the evidence that it actually occurred on the Wednesday of Jesus last week. First thing I ever heard about Jesus.
Wow.
And so I thought, I don't know if Jesus even lived.
Yeah, this is important. Tuesday or Wednesday.
But yeah, if he did, why do you care if it was Tuesday or Wednesday? What are we talking about? So he turned off the TV in disgust, knocked on the door, went out to brunch with my girlfriend. But the rest of the day, I could not stop thinking about it. Like, I just had all these questions, like, why do you care if it was Tuesday or Wednesday? And he said evidence. What kind of evidence would there be for this? And did anyone ever get him out of the chair? Like, he was pretty stuck in that thing. And so that night I was in my girlfriend's dorm room. I looked up at her bookshelf, which I probably did many times before, but I noticed that she had a Bible, which I'd never noticed. And I said, "Hey, why do you have a Bible?" And she's like, "Oh, somebody gave that to me years ago." And I said, "Could I borrow it?" And she said, "You can have it. I don't want it. If you don't want to keep it, just throw it out." And so I was like, "Cool." And so I took this Bible back to my dorm room, never touched a Bible in my life until that moment. And it was a student Bible. And so these Bibles came out. I don't know if they still make them or not, but they were for teenagers. And so instead of opening up to Genesis 1:1, when you open a student Bible, it says reading plans. And so I open it up and I see, because I'm just curious now because this guy. And so I see reading plan through Abraham's life. I'm like, Lincoln? Like, literally, I don't know what it means. Moses' life, David's life. And I'm flipping through and I see reading plan through Jesus' life. And I thought, all right, I'll do that one. I mean, let's figure this out. Was it Tuesday or Wednesday?
That's a big question.
We're gonna solve this right now. And so I start reading, and I thought that it would sound like a tall tale or a myth, that it would start out once upon a time, and it would, be this legendary tales of Jesus lassoing tornadoes, and I was stunned that repeatedly the Bible says, at this time in this place Jesus did this thing over and over. And I thought, man, if you give a time and a place, like, I could find out if that really happened. Like, there would be evidence there, maybe not Tuesday, Wednesday, but there would be other historians that talked about these incredible things that happened. And if there weren't, why not? And it must be that the Bible's made up. And so I kept reading. I discovered that the Bible claims there's a God who loves me, that he sent Jesus to live for me and die for me, and I could have a relationship with him. And I knew I had to know. And so I spent months studying the evidence. I went to the library and said, I got to figure this out. And I was a pre-law major. I did end up going to law school, so I was into that kind of thing. And I don't know, 3 months later, I read the Bible and studied evidence for it 4, 6, 8, 10 hours a day, every single day. I was just absolutely intrigued.
Amazing.
And I was quickly overwhelmed with the evidence for Jesus and just God's heart for me, God's love for me. And so I decided to become a Christian. Still hadn't met one that I knew of. And that was...
How old were you? 20?
20 years old, yep.
And you prayed to receive Christ. How long was that process of reading? And, you're studying 8 to 10 hours a day on this. How long was that process between getting that Bible and reading through the life of Jesus to trusting in Christ?
2 months, maybe, something like that.
2 months.
So yeah, my dad had just gotten out of jail. He was in and out of jail. And I went down to visit him with school during the summer. And he said, I told him, it was one of the first people I told. I said, hey, I guess I became a Christian. And he was like, really? And he said, who have you been talking to? And I said, nobody, I don't know any. And he said, well, there was a pastor who did a Bible study in the jail. Would you like to meet him? He gave me his card. And I said, yeah, that'd be good. And so he came over that night. My dad called him and he came right over. It was like 10 o'clock at night. We talked for hours, went to his church the next morning, got baptized. And yeah.
That's amazing, man.
Yeah,
that's
crazy.
That's like Saul or Paul's conversion stuff, man. That's amazing.
It was wild.
And so, you're pre-law major, you trust in Christ, and now you ended up planting a church in Vegas, and I want to get there here in just a minute. Fill in the gaps there.
Sure.
That's a big life transition and change.
Yeah. So I started going to church. I went to school in Buffalo, New York, started going to church in Buffalo, New York, and was planning on going to law school. Thought immediately when I became a Christian, I was like, all I want to do is tell people about Jesus. Like, no one ever told me. Like, I couldn't believe it. It's like, I've been reading the Bible like crazy, and I see Jesus' command is for us to go and share him with people. And I'm like, why did no one? I didn't live in the jungles of Africa. No. Like, how did no one ever tell me? And so I started telling my friends, leading my friends to faith, and thought maybe I should be a pastor. I was like, no, I could never do that. And so I went to law school, and the whole time I was there, just felt like God was like saying, I love law school. Most people hate it. I loved it. But I just felt like God was saying, hey, this is not what you're supposed to do with your life. And so after the first year of law school, I transferred, went to seminary, and went in seminary. I went and I said, hey, I want to get a degree in how to lead people to Jesus. And they said, we don't have that degree. And I said, well, that's all. I just want to lead people to Jesus. And
it's kind of an indictment on the seminary, isn't it? Yeah.
He said, well, we got church growth. I was like, is it how to lead people to Jesus? And he goes, that's the closest we got. And I'm like, all right. And so, but I found out about church planting, which I had no idea about. And I just thought churches that always existed. Yeah. And so I was like, learned that church planting was a way to help people who are far from God come to faith. And I said, okay. And so I worked for a couple of years in churches for some get experience. And then I started a church in Virginia Beach, Virginia. I was there for 12 years, and then had a crazy calling to Las Vegas and started a church there, and I've been there for 14 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
One of the things that I've always admired about you, really got to know you in writing The Always God, was your heart for the lost, the unchurched, the de-churched. And obviously hearing your story, people listening to this podcast can see, well, of course he has a heart for the lost. Mm-hmm. And I've found, and you probably found it to be true as well, Vince, that if you ask the average Christian, what are some things you wish you could do better as a Christian? I mean, almost always you're going to get one of two answers. I wish I prayed more, and I wish I shared Jesus more. Yeah. Always. And so what is it? This podcast is about helping people move forward in their walk with the Lord. And we're talking about, moving people forward and coming to know the Lord. What are some ways that people listening to this can foster a heart for evangelism, foster a heart for sharing Jesus? How do we get, Vince? Maybe you can answer this. Why, number one, do we lose that passion, it seems like, or extinguish it, or whatever we may do? And then what are some things that we can do to make sure that we are always keeping our hearts sensitive toward those who are far away from God?
Yeah. I think a couple things happen. As a Christian, whether I become a Christian like I did or grew up in the faith, I think one thing that happens is for most of us, all of our friends are Christians. And so it's difficult to be passionate for people far from God when you don't know any. In fact, I found that happened to me. I did, after seminary, so when I became a Christian, all I cared about was people who are far from God. I'm talking to all my friends about Jesus, leading them in faith, baptizing them. And then I went to seminary and knew almost only Christians. And I did an internship at this huge church, knew almost only Christians. Worked at a church for 2 years, almost knew only Christians. And I found, I don't even think I knew what was happening, but my passion for lost people was diminished. It was still the most important thing in my life, but it wasn't the same. And so one day, this is an odd story, but there's a point. I was driving a car late at night through the middle of Virginia, and I had only listened to Christian music for years. When I became a Christian, somebody told me, don't listen to non-Christian music. I'm like, okay.
Burn all those cassettes and CDs.
Exactly. So, but it was middle of the night. I'm like 1:30 in the morning, and I was tired, so I'm trying to keep myself awake. And so I turned on the radio, and there was only secular station. So I'm like, all right, I'll break the parole agreement and listen to that secular station. And so this song comes on that I had never heard. It's a song called Mr. Jones by Counting Crows. And I don't know who the band, I don't know anything, but the singer says, help me to believe in something because I don't believe in anything. And I want to be someone who believes. And I heard that lyric and I thought, man, I have had the last couple of years, I have almost no non-Christian friends because I'm so involved in my church. And I haven't listened to non-Christian music because I'm afraid of what it might do to me if I listen to it. But what has it done to me to not listen to it? I've distanced myself from people like this who are writing songs begging somebody give me something to believe in. And I thought, I just started feeling sick, about where I was. And I realized, I'm really feeling sick. And I realized I was going to throw up. This is a true story. I rolled my window down and I pointed my face out and I just tried to project out the window. And what I learned in that moment is that vomit has very little wind resistance. And so it all blew back in, almost completely missed me. My wife was sleeping in the seat next to me. It went past me, almost completely all went on her. She woke up and screamed, I quote, "What's happening to me?"
You threw up on your wife over your heart being broken.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I felt like God was like, hey, that vomit was meant for you. That was a holy wake up call from God of like, you have not spent time with people far from God and therefore lost your passion. And so I think part of it is just getting yourself around people who need Jesus. And so I encourage people, figure out a way, invite your neighbors over for dinner, even if it's, a little weird. Some people are like, well, I've lived next to him for 20 years and I've never done that. Why would I now? I said, tell them, say, I realized we've lived next to you. We've lived down the street for you for 20 years and I've never gotten to know you. Would you come over for dinner? Or start a new hobby and take a class. If you've always been like, I want to learn photography or something, take a class just to be in the class with people who are far from God. So I think part of it is getting ourselves around people who are far from God. And I think part of it is we're just afraid. We feel like I wouldn't be very good at it. I wouldn't know what to say. I don't know. I don't think they want me to say anything to them either. We'd both be uncomfortable. And so the encouragement I give people, in fact, I'm honored I get to speak at chapel for your staff today. I'm going to talk about this, is I always say, lead with love. There's two things we have to offer as Christians. We have truth and we have love. Pretty much that's it. As a Christian, I can give people truth and I can give them love. And people need truth and people need love. That's the two things people need. So it's perfect. The problem, I think, is that most Christians try to lead with truth. And so, they lead with either trying to point out what's wrong in the person's life, which is true. You might recognize some sin in their life and you want to point it out, or by leading with truth and trying to convince them that they're wrong about what they believe and I'm right about Jesus. And so we lead with truth. And the thing is that truth shuts people down. When I say people, I mean everyone. I mean you and me. I like to drink diet soda. And I've had people who say, hey, that causes cancer or whatever. And I don't go, oh, man, thank you so much for sharing that with me. Yeah. I'm like, shut up. I don't want to hear what you have to say about what I'm doing. Everyone's like that. I'm like that. And so when we lead with truth, it shuts people down. But we also have love. And when we lead with love, man, that opens people up. It makes them trust you. It makes them want to hear more. And it's what Jesus did. We see him when we see him with sinful people. We do not see him leading with truth. We see him eating a meal with Zacchaeus, inviting himself, hey, I want to go and eat at your house, at Zacchaeus' house. And, showing love to this prostitute who comes and puts perfume on his feet, or the woman caught in adultery. He just leads with love. And then we see him get to truth. And so I'm not at all suggesting we don't share the truth of Jesus. Sure. But when you lead with love, it's like people don't want to be, no one woke up this morning thinking, man, I hope someone convinces me that I'm wrong today. Yeah. But everyone woke up this morning wanting to be loved. Yeah. And so, and most of us, there are some people who have their personality type, this evangelistic personality type that I don't mind confronting people, but most of us don't want to try to convince somebody they're wrong. Yeah. And so,
I listened to those stories of people getting on airplanes and they started sharing their faith and they got saved and the whole life was transformed in a, 2-hour plane ride. I'm like, that never happens to me, man. I get next to people, the earphones are on or whatever. But I think that leading with love is so very important because it shows you're caring more about the person. Mm-hmm. They're not a project. So often we've trained even in sharing your faith. You got to get this presentation out. You got to make sure you share this outline. And so we're actually teaching people to lead, as you say, with truth, as opposed to, no. How about we listen first? Mm-hmm. How about we care about the person first? That they're not a project. They're a person loved by God. And so I love that.
Yeah. If you lead with love, I think what happens often, and we see it with Jesus too, is somebody will end up asking you to talk to them about Jesus instead of you trying to force it and find the right moment, which eventually, once you build a relationship, I do look for the right moment. But instead of looking for it often, I found that if I love people, if I try to love people in the way that I think Jesus would, which is a little beyond, normal, it's beyond just being nice. But, your coworker mentions they're flying somewhere and this weekend or whatever, and you say, do you need a ride to the airport? No one wants to drive anyone to the airport, but you offer. What are you doing this weekend? I'm painting my house. Hey, can I come over and help you paint? No, who does that? Yeah. And so just trying to look for ways to serve people and love them. Like you said, listen, when you see somebody and you realize something's wrong, say, hey, are you okay? And they say, yeah, I'm fine. Are you really? And then say, man, talk to me. People notice that. And at some point they will start to say things like, man, you're different.
That's it, man.
What's different about you?
Yeah, that's what we say is live your life in such a way that people ask you why. Yeah. Like, why are you different? What? You're going on vacation to a mission trip? What is that all about? You're spending money in that way. We just recently did a series called Bless, based off the book that was written by the Ferguson brothers. Mm-hmm. And you've probably seen it. You begin with prayer. Yep. How often, prayer is what softens the heart. Yep. The L is listen. The E is eat. You look at Jesus' life, so much of his life revolved around the table. Yeah. And it just breaks down barriers. The S is serve. And then eventually you share. Mm-hmm. And it's just the way that you bless people. So
I love that because the first 80% is building that relationship and showing the person you care. And then finally, and when you get, I compare it to show and tell when you're a kid. If it's show and tell, so a kid shows everybody and then they tell. If it was tell and show, it would be a disaster. If you had these kindergartners and they had to hold the thing behind their back and they said, well, this is, my uncle gave it to me and it's cute. And you'd be like, what are you talking about? And then they pull it out and it's a, toy airplane or whatever. You'd be like, oh, okay, I guess. But if you show it to everybody, then they're like, yeah, it's a toy airplane. And then they go, my uncle gave it to me and it's kind of cute and I play with it. And you're like, yeah, it's a toy airplane. And a lot of us are not professional talkers about Jesus, professional evangelists. But if we show people Jesus, then when we talk about it, they're like, I get it.
Yeah, it makes sense.
I've seen it in your life. Like, this is who you are.
So good.
Yeah.
Is that what led you to go to Sin City? You just to go, just be, if we're going to be around lost people, let's go to the place where we know lost people are.
Yeah. So, I mean, really, God led me there. And I don't say that lightly at all. It was a crazy story. But once I accepted what God was, I didn't want to go. We loved where we were, wanted to stay there. But once I wanted to go, I was like, man, that's a cool place. If you want lost people, there's a lot of them there for sure. And so, and it was also my dad ruined his life and my parents' marriage and my childhood in Las Vegas. And so it was like, man, it's just like God to poetically give this
redeem that whole thing
story. Yeah. So it's pretty cool.
And so tell me about the church.
So we started 14 years ago. The first person I led to faith was a pimp. Which, when I moved to Las Vegas, if you had said, do you think you'll ever lead a pimp to faith? I would have been like, no, like that would be crazy, but no. And it was literally the first person who led to faith, first person who got baptized. We baptized him. We met in my house for 5 or 6 months. And then we met at a casino in like a little theater they had for 4 or 5 months. We baptized him in the hot tub at the casino.
That is amazing.
Just the only holy thing that's ever happened in that hot tub, I'm sure. He was a pimp, and that was 13 and a half years ago. And 6 or 7 years ago, he became a pastor. And in November, so almost a year ago now, he moved to Denver to start a church. And so we went from pimp to pastor to church planter. And we just have literally hundreds of stories like that of people far from God coming to faith, and just crazy strippers and atheists and gamblers and Buddhists and all kinds of crazy stories.
That's amazing, man. I think I first heard your name when your book, God for the Rest of Us, came out. And I've got a copy of it right here in my hand, Experiencing Unbelievable Love, Unlimited Hope, and Uncommon Grace. And every chapter is like, this is basically a story of your church plant. God for the rest of us, God for prostitutes, God for the shame-filled, God for addicts, God for dysfunctional families. This is awesome. God for the tattooed, God for the atheists, God for the warriors. You're a great writer, man, and just know how to tell stories. You've got several books out. You've got one called Restore, Breaking Out of Your Past and Into God's Future. You've got one called Renegade, Your Faith Isn't Meant to Be Safe. I think your newest one is I Became a Christian and All I Got Was This Lousy T-Shirt.
That was actually the first one.
That was the first one.
Yeah.
And so out of all the books that you've written, which one resonates with you? I mean, I know they're almost like kids, how your authors say, because you write them at different stages and they mean certain things. But which one do you most just resonate, has your heart?
Man, that's a great question. No one's ever asked me. Maybe that one, the God for the Rest of Us. But the first one, I Became a Christian, All I Got Was a Lousy T-Shirt. People just seem to love that book. It's actually, I think, sold more copies than all the other ones combined.
Really?
Part of it, I think, is the name. People, kind of captures their attention. But the idea is, so many people genuinely, I think, become Christians. They understand who Jesus is, what he did on the cross, they put their faith in him, but may never. I don't want to sound judgmental, is why I'm hesitating.
Sure.
They never really lived the Christian life, not because, not necessarily because they're sinful and, and they're rejecting God, but they just don't even try it. And so, for instance, not only, but for instance, sharing your faith. Jesus said that is the mission. As a follower of Jesus, you're to do what Jesus did. Jesus said, it's John chapter 20, verse 21. He said, as the Father has sent me, I am sending you. And the Father sent Jesus to let everyone know about God's love and so that they may all go to heaven. And so that's the Christian life. And a lot of, so I think the statistic is 96% of Christians never share their faith, not one time in their life. And so 96% of Christians might be completely well-meaning and have good hearts, but they're missing out on the main thing they're supposed to do. And so many Christians feel like, man, I don't, it's just, and they don't always admit this, but sometimes as a pastor, you have people say, I feel like I'm missing something, or, I hear you talk about the joy that I'm supposed to have as a Christian, or the sense of purpose, and I just don't feel it. And it's like, yeah, because you're not actually living the life that God has for you. And so that's kind of the idea of that book.
Yeah. You talk about, sharing your faith. And I know there are people listening to this podcast and they say, I hear you on that and I'm trying. I've been sharing my faith with my friend for, years. And I wrote in the Always God about sharing faith with my brother for 17 years. And that pimp that you led to Christ, it didn't happen in a one-time conversation. So just talk to that person listening that's saying, I'm trying to share my faith, but man, I feel like, this one person or these people in my area of influence, they're just not listening. Share what words of hope and encouragement would you share with that person that's saying that right now?
That's great. I'll share an encouraging word, I hope, and an equipping word. The encouraging word would be, just as you said, 17 years. It's not for, everybody has their own timetable, and for some it can be years. And so just don't give up. It says in Galatians, don't give up. Just keep working, because at the right time there's going to be a harvest. And so I would just say, you have no idea. I've talked to had so many as a pastor. You have a wife whose husband won't come, and husband won't come, and then something happens. And, I think of this guy, Dallas, who I write about in one of my books, and he's one of the most amazing Christians I know. He's done unbelievable things for God, quit a great job at GE to lead a homeless ministry for no salary. But he was that husband who would not consider going to church, would not consider Jesus, and just something happened in his life. And so the one thing I'd say is, don't give up. You have no idea what God might be doing. The equipping thing I'd say is, and this may not work for everybody, but instead of, one is, so like with inviting people to church, which is, one of the ways you can do evangelism. You can share your own story, you can share Jesus' story, but you can share an invitation. And they say that it typically takes 7 invitations to get somebody to come to church. Most Christians, it's like, I'll invite somebody maybe 2 times, maybe 3, but I'm not going to keep inviting them. It just sounds stubborn. They didn't come the first 3 times. Why would I invite them again? But it takes 7. And so you just keep inviting, you just keep sharing. But another idea is, if you've shared your story, you've shared the gospel, nothing's happened, to say, hey, would you be open? What if we together, or maybe you on your own, what if we read, there's these 4 books in the Bible that talk about Jesus' life, and you just get to really know Jesus and how much he loves us and what he tells us about God. What if you read Mark? It's the shortest one. Or what if you read John and we talk about it? Instead of me trying to tell you, you've heard my story, you've heard what I say, but what if you actually went to the source and you might decide it's not for you, but like just to really get to know Jesus. And so there's 16 chapters in Mark, each one will take you 10 minutes. So what if you read 10 minutes a week and we just talk about it? Maybe we could read it together, or maybe we get together for lunch and take 20 minutes to talk about what you read and what questions you have. But that's what led me to faith, was reading the Bible, just reading the life of Jesus study in that Bible. And so it's powerful when you just read about Jesus' life. Yeah,
and in the context of a relationship, I can't imagine many people would turn you down for that in the context of a relationship. And even if they do, it might strike up like it did for you, this curiosity. No, I've got to read. You were talking about this power of 7 invitations. And I often say, Jesus said, you are the salt of the earth, and that you there is plural. And I often tell, our congregation is, if we are nobody, when they put salt on their food, puts 1 kernel of salt and, says, light it up, no, you get liberal with it. You throw as much salt on there to add flavor to it. Well, if we're all being salt, man, those invitations can come from so many different people, because that person that I'm praying for and working on could be at the gym with somebody else that's being salt and they're praying and working on it. Could be at the office with somebody else that's praying on and working on, could be eating, so there's, when we do our role, play our part, pray and ask God to move, it's amazing what can happen. And so, Vince, fill us in right now, man, just how we can be praying for you, what you're up to these days. And I want people to know about your ministry. And so just tell us a little bit about your ministry, how people can stay up with you, and how we can be praying for you.
Man, that's a good question because I've recently gone through some change. Our church actually just merged with another church. It's a long, cool story. It's a great church in Las Vegas that we've been kind of partnered up with our whole time, and so we are becoming a campus of them. And so it's kind of a time of transition for me, and I'm moving into doing more writing and working with pastors with books and helping them with sermon research and things like that. And so, it's a awkward time for me of figuring out, okay, what does God want me to do next? There's also a real good friend I have who's a missionary in India. And so I'm working with some things with him of things I can help him with in India. If you could pray for that, that would be awesome. Just what God has for me and what next steps I need to take.
Yeah. And your website's vinceantonucci.com.
Yep. And then I'm on Twitter, but I don't do much.
It's X now, Vince. Come on now. It's X now.
Oh yeah, it is X.
Twitter,
yeah. So I don't say much on there, but a little bit.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for being with us today. Again, thanks for coming in to encourage our team and really encourage those of you listening. Follow Vince. It's Vince Antonucci, vinceantonucci.com. Great writer. Get his books. Grow in your faith. Keep moving forward. Vince, thanks so much for being here today.
Thank you, man. It's an honor. Thanks.